And then Dumbledore called out from the back row, where he stood with the other teachers. "Aha! Unless I am very much mistaken, the delegation for Bobaxton approaches." "Where?" said many students eagerly, all looking in different directions. "There!" yelled the sixth year, pointing over the forest. Something large, much larger than a broomstick, or indeed 100 broomsticks, was hurtling across the deep blue sky towards the castle, growing larger all the time. "It's a dragon!" shrieked one of the first years, losing her head completely. "Don't be stupid. It's a flying house," said Dennis Creevy. Dennis's guess was closer, as the gigantic black shape skimmed over the treetops of the forbidden forest, and the light shining from the castle windows hit it. They saw a gigantic powder blue horse-drawn carriage, the size of a large house, soaring towards them, pulled through the air by a dozen winged horses, all palominos, and each the size of an elephant. The front three rows of students drew backwards as the carriage hurtled over ever lower, coming into land at a tremendous speed. Then, with an almighty crash that made Neville jump backwards onto a Slytherin first year's foot, the horse's hooves, larger than dinner plates, hit the ground. A second later, the carriage landed too, bouncing up upon its vast wheels, while the golden horses tossed their enormous heads and rolled large, fiery red eyes. Harry just had time to see that the door of the carriage bore a coat of arms, two crossed golden wands, each emitting 3 stars, before it opened. A boy in pale blue robes jumped down from the carriage, bent forward, fumbled for a moment with something on the carriage floor, and unfolded a set of golden steps. He sprang back respectfully. Then Harry saw a shining, high-heeled black shoe emerging from the inside of the carriage. A shoe the size of a child's enormous sled, followed almost immediately by the largest woman he had ever seen in his life. The size of the carriage and the horses was immediately explained. A few people gasped. Harry had only ever seen one person as large as this woman in his life, and that was Hagrid. He doubted whether there was an inch difference in their height. Yet, somehow, maybe simply because he was used to Hagrid, this woman... There's some nice pictures.
Beautiful illustrations.
Now at the foot of the steps, and looked around at the waiting, wide-eyed crowd, seemed even more unnaturally large. As she stepped into the light flooding from the entrance hall, she revealed to be a handsome olive-skinned face, large, black, liquid-looking eyes, and a rather beaky nose. Her hair was drawn back in a shining knob at the base of her neck. She was dressed from head to foot in black satin, and many magnificent opals gleamed at her throat and on her thick fingers. Dumbledore started to clap. The students, following his lead, broke into applause too, many of them standing on tiptoe, the better to look at this woman. Her face relaxed into a gracious smile, and she walked forward towards Dumbledore, extending a glittering hand. Dumbledore, though tall himself, was barely to bend to kiss. Had barely to bend to kiss. "My dear Madame Maxime," he said, "welcome to Hogwarts." "Dumbledore," said Madame Maxime in a deep voice, "I hope I find you well." "On excellent form, I thank you," said Dumbledore. "My pupils," said Madame Maxime, waving one of her enormous hands carelessly behind her. Harry, whose attention had been focused completely on Madame Maxime, now noticed that around a dozen boys and girls, all by the look of them in their late teens, had emerged from the carriage and were now standing behind Madame Maxime. They were shivering, which was unsurprising, given that their robes seemed to be made of fine silk, and none of them were wearing cloaks. A few of them had wrapped scarves and shawls around their heads. From what Harry could see of their faces, they were standing in Madame Maxime's enormous shadow, and they were staring up at Hogwarts with apprehensive looks on their faces. As Cockcroft arrived, yet? Madame Maxime asked. He should be here any moment, said Dumbledore. Would you like to wait here or greet him, or would you prefer to step inside and warm up a trifle? Warm up, I think, said Madame Maxime. But the horses, our care of magical creatures teacher will be delighted to take care of them, said Dumbledore, the moment he has returned from dealing with a slight situation which has arisen with some of his other charges. Scroots, Ron muttered to Harry, grinning. My steeds require a forceful handling, said Madame Maxime, looking as though she doubted whether any care of magical creatures teacher at Hogwarts could be up for the job. They are very strong. I assure you that Hagrid will be well up to the job, said Dumbledore, smiling. Very well, said Madame Maxime, bowing slightly. Will you please inform this Hagrid that the horses drink only single malt whiskey? It will be attended to, said Dumbledore, with also bowing.
Whiskey.
Come, said
What's
Madame
whiskey, Mom?
Maxime imperiously to her students, and the Hogwarts crowd parted to allow her and her students to pass up the stone steps. How big do you reckon Durmstrang's horses are going to be? Seamus Finnegan said, leaning over around Lavender and Parvati to address Ron and Harry and Ron. Well, if they're any bigger than this lot, even Hagrid won't be able to handle them, said Harry. That's if hasn't been attacked by his Scroots. Wonder what's up with them. Maybe they've escaped, said Ron hopefully. Oh, don't say that, said Hermione with a shudder. Imagine that lot on the loose in the grounds. They stood, shivering slightly now, waiting for the Durmstrang party to arrive. Most people were gazing hopefully up at the sky. For a few minutes the silence was broken only by Madame Maxime's huge horses snorting and stamping. But then, can you hear something? Said Ron suddenly. Harry listened. A loud, oddly eerie noise was drifting towards them from out of the darkness, a muffled rumbling and sucking sound, as though an immense vacuum cleaner was moving along a riverbed. The lake, yelled Lee Jordan, pointing down at it. Look at the lake. From their position at the top of the lawns, overlooking the grounds, they had a clear view of the smooth black surface of the water, except that the surface was suddenly not smooth at all. Some disturbance was taking place deep in the center. Great bubbles were forming on the surface. Waves were now washing over the muddy banks, and then, out in the very middle of the lake, a whirlpool appeared, as if a giant plug had been pulled out of the lake's floor. What seemed to be a long black pole began to rise slowly out of the heart of the whirlpool, and then Harry saw the rain. It's a mast, he said to Ron and Hermione. Slowly, magnificently, the ship rose out of the water, gleaming in the moonlight. It had a strangely skeletal look about it, as though it was a resurrected wreck, and the dim, misty lights shimmering at its portholes looked like ghostly eyes. Finally, with a great sloshing noise, the ship emerged entirely, bobbing on the turbulent water, and began to glide towards the bank. A few moments later they heard the splash of an anchor being thrown down into the shallows, and the thud of a plank being lowered onto the bank. People were disembarking. They could see their silhouettes passing the lights in the ship portholes. All of them, Harry noticed, seemed to be built along the lines of Crabbe and Goyle. But then, as they drew nearer, walking up the lawn into the light streaming from the entrance hall, he saw that their bulk was really due to the fact that they were wearing cloaks of some kind of shaggy matted fur. But the man who was leading them up to the castle was wearing furs of a different sort, sleek and silver, like his hair. Dumbledore, he called heartily, as he walked up the slope. "How are you, my dear fellow? How are you?" "Blooming, thank you, Professor Karkaroff," Dumbledore replied. Karkaroff had a fruity, unctuous voice. When he stepped into the light pouring from the front door of the castle, they saw that he was tall and thin, like Dumbledore, but his white hair was short, and his goatee, finishing in a small curl, did not entirely hide his rather weak chin. When he reached Dumbledore, he shook hands with both of his own. "Dear old Hogwarts," he said, looking up at the castle and smiling. His teeth were rather yellow, and Harry noticed that his smile did not extend to his eyes, which remained cold and shrewd. "How good it is to be here. How good. Victor, come along into the warmth. You don't mind, Dumbledore? Victor has a slight head cold." Karkaroff beckoned forward one of the students. As the boy passed, Harry caught a glimpse of the prominent curved nose and thick black eyebrows. He didn't need the punch in the arm from Ron gave him, or the hiss in his ear to recognize that profile. "Harry, it's Krum!"